Picture this. You are lying flat on your back in the freezing mud, but the cold is the least of your problems. There is a massive, rough-hewn wooden plank pressing down on your face, crushing your nose and pinning your shoulders to the earth. You try to inhale, but a sudden, terrifying weight slams onto the wood above you, forcing the air from your lungs in a wet gasp. Then comes another weight, and another. Above the planks, heavy boots are stomping in rhythm. You hear the wild, guttural singing of men celebrating a slaughter, the splashing of fermented mare's milk, and the tearing of roasted meat. You are a prince of the Kievan Rus, and you are currently serving as the foundation for a Mongol victory banquet. They are literally partying on top of you, slowly crushing you and your fellow nobles to death over the course of hours. You hear the bones of your brothers snapping like dry twigs under the boots of the dancing conquerors. And presiding over this masterpiece of psychological terror is a man who hasn't lost a battle in his life. The architect of your agony is Subutai, the greatest general of the Mongol Empire. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The year is 1223, and the banks of the Kalka River are soaking up the blood of an annihilated coalition. Subutai and his fellow commander Jebe have just pulled off one of the most stunning military operations in human history. With a mere scouting force of 20,000 light cavalry, they have ridden thousands of miles from Mongolia, carved a path of devastation through the Caucasus Mountains, and entirely dismantled an allied army of 80,000 Rus and Cuman warriors. They did not just beat them, they embarrassed them. They lured the heavy, slow-moving European knights into a reckless, multi-day chase across the steppe, stretching their supply lines until the men and horses were half dead from exhaustion. Then the retreating Mongols simply turned their horses around, let loose a storm of armor-piercing arrows, and butchered the exhausted coalition where they stood. The victory at Kalka River is absolute, but it does something dangerous to the Mongol commanders. It infects them with the ultimate military disease: arrogance. Up until this moment, the Mongol war machine has operated on cold, hard pragmatism. They do not fight for honor or glory. They fight to win using deception, terror, and flawless logistics. But as Subutai watches the last of the Rus princes suffocate beneath the floorboards of his dining tent, a new, toxic belief begins to take root in his mind. He looks at the mutilated corpses of the European nobility and decides that the rest of the world is nothing more than soft clay, waiting to be molded by the hooves of his horses. He believes his men are untouchable. He believes his tactics are infallible. He believes he is a god of war who can outsmart any adversary on earth. This intoxicating delusion is the exact state of mind required to walk blindly into a trap. With the Rus coalition broken and the wealthy cities of the West screaming in terror, Subutai receives orders from Genghis Khan to begin the long journey home to the Mongolian steppe. But instead of taking a safe, direct route back through the conquered territories, Subutai looks toward the northeast. He looks toward the dense, mysterious forests of the middle Volga River. This is the territory of the Volga Bulgars, a wealthy, independent civilization of traders and engineers who control the northern trade routes. To Subutai, they are just another line item on the butcher's bill. Just another group of static farmers waiting to be terrorized by his invincible horse archers. He gathers his 20,000 seasoned killers, shakes the blood of Kalka River from his boots, and rides north, He thinks he is marching to another easy slaughter. He has no idea he is marching his men straight into a meat grinder. Listen to the sound of 20,000 men who believe they are gods. It is a low, rolling thunder that vibrates through the soles of your boots long before the dust cloud blocks out the sun. This is the Mongol rearguard marching north from the Kalka River. They are not cheering, they don't need to. They are a perfectly oiled organic machine of death, moving with terrifying silent efficiency. Behind them, they drag wagons groaning under the weight of looted silver, fine silks and chained slaves weeping for their murdered families. The horses are fat on spring grass, and the men are fat on the intoxicating nectar of total, unchallenged supremacy. Put yourself in the mind of a Mongol cavalryman in the year 1223. You have spent your entire life in the saddle. You can shoot a heavy war arrow through a man's neck at a full gallop while turning backwards. But more importantly, you have never tasted defeat. Your father rode with Genghis Khan and shattered the Jin dynasty. You just rode with Subutai and humiliated the combined might of Eastern Europe. To you, the rest of humanity is a different species. They are slow, stupid, and rooted to the dirt. You believe with absolute religious certainty that the eternal blue sky has granted you ownership of the entire world. Everyone else is just a squatter waiting to be evicted by the edge of your sword. This is not mere confidence. This is a weaponized, structural arrogance. It is the belief that the laws of physics and military strategy no longer apply to you. At the head of this invincible column rides Subutai, the architect of this delusion. Subutai is a tactical genius, a man who views warfare as a mathematical equation of speed, distance, and terror. His entire doctrine relies on the open steppe. As long as he has endless horizons, unbroken sightlines, and hard ground for his horses, he is untouchable. He can feign retreats for days, stretching enemy lines until they snap. But unbroken success breeds a very specific kind of blindness. When every hammer strike shatters the glass, you start to believe that everything in the world is fragile. As the army pushes northeast, away from the familiar, endless oceans of grass, the physical world begins to subtly rebel against them. The horizon shrinks, the wide, dry plains give way to rolling hills, and then to something far more sinister for a nomadic horseman: trees. Thick, ancient forests of pine and birch begin to crowd the marching columns. The ground beneath the hooves of the horses turns from hard-packed earth to soft, treacherous mud and tangled roots. The landscape is violently carved by deep ravines and the winding, unpredictable tributaries of the middle Volga River. To a steppe warrior, this environment is claustrophobic. It strips away their greatest advantage, maneuverability. In a dense forest or a muddy ravine, you cannot execute a sweeping flanking maneuver. You cannot outrun your enemy. You are forced into brutal, linear, hand-to-hand combat. But Subutai, blinded by the blood-soaked glory of Kalka, ignores the warnings of the land. He is driving his men straight toward the territory of the Volga Bulgars. Subutai imagines them as just another disorganized collection of static farmers waiting to be harvested. He is dead wrong. The Volga Bulgars are a wealthy, highly advanced Islamic civilization sitting at the crossroads of major northern trade routes. They are engineers, merchants, and hardened veterans who command formidable, heavy cavalry of their own. More importantly, they are not ignorant. They have heard the screams echoing from the Kalka River. They know the Mongols are coming. The geography of hubris is not a physical place. It is the blind spot in a conqueror's mind. It is the exact moment the apex predator forgets that it can bleed. The Mongol army stretches out along the narrowing forest trails, their legendary discipline slowly rotting into casual sloppiness. They are weighed down by the plunder of Europe, drunk on their own myth of invincibility, completely unaware that the trees around them are closing in. They think they are marching to a slaughter. They are right. They just don't realize whose blood is going to be spilled. Forget everything you think you know about medieval victims. When we picture the people who stood in the path of the Mongol Empire, we usually imagine terrified peasants huddling in mud huts, waiting for the apocalypse. The Volga Bulgars are not those people. They are apex predators in their own right, just a different breed. Situated at the confluence of the Volga and Kama rivers, they control the medieval equivalent of the global stock exchange. They are getting rich off the lucrative northern trade routes, dealing in luxury furs, silver dirhams and slaves. Their cities are fortresses of timber and stone, and their armies are hardened veterans equipped with chainmail and steel-tipped lances. They are not waiting to be slaughtered. They are actively engineering a nightmare for Subutai. The leaders of the Volga Bulgars have excellent intelligence networks. The merchants traveling up the rivers have already whispered the horrors of the Kalka River into their ears. They know Subutai has wiped out the Rus coalition. They know his horse archers are devastatingly fast and completely merciless, but instead of panicking, the Bulgar commanders sit down and look at a map. They understand a fundamental truth of warfare that the arrogant Mongols have temporarily forgotten. You do not fight a hurricane by standing in an open field. You drag the hurricane into a tight box and watch it tear itself apart. The box they choose is a geographical freak of nature known as the Samara Bend. Here, the massive Volga River hits a range of limestone mountains and is forced into a sharp, hairpin loop. The land trapped inside this loop is a claustrophobic nightmare for a horseborne army. It is a labyrinth of dense, ancient forests, sudden plunging ravines, and treacherous bogs that can swallow a horse to its chest. There are no open plains here. There are only narrow, muddy arteries winding through walls of impenetrable timber. The Volga Bulgars look at this natural choke point and realize they do not need to build a fortress to stop the Mongols. The earth has already built one for them. They just need to turn it into a slaughterhouse. And so the trap is meticulously set. This is not a rushed ambush. It is a massive, premeditated industrial project of death. Thousands of Bulgar soldiers and engineers move into the forests of the Samara Bend. They do not chop down trees to clear a path. They fell them to create barricades, funneling the available trails into increasingly narrow killing zones. They dig hidden trenches in the mud and sharpen wooden stakes, angling them perfectly to impale the chest of a galloping horse. They are manipulating the environment, transforming the wild forest into a highly structured corridor of violence. Then comes the most crucial part of the master plan, the bait. The Bulgars know that Subutai is drunk on victory and thirsty for more blood. If they show him their full strength, his predatory instincts might kick in, and he might reconsider entering the dense woods. So they hide their heavy cavalry and their massive infantry formations deep within the timber, completely out of sight. They wrap the jaws of the trap in absolute silence. Instead of an army, they prepare to send out a pathetic, deliberately weak vanguard, a handful of light cavalry and skirmishers whose only job is to ride out, make contact with the invincible Mongol horde, and then immediately run away in apparent sheer terror. It is the ultimate psychological insult, designed specifically to trigger the arrogance of a conqueror who thinks the whole world is afraid of him. The Bulgars are going to take the Mongols' favorite, most famous tactic, the feigned retreat, and feed it right back down their throats. They are betting the survival of their entire civilization on one simple premise. They believe Subutai's ego has grown so massive that it has made him blind. And as the Mongol vanguard crosses into Bulgar territory, the trap is armed. The bait is cast, and the butchers wait patiently in the shadows. It is the ultimate insult in the history of warfare. If you are going to kill a master thief, you do not kick down his door, you pick his pocket. For decades, the feigned retreat has been the signature masterpiece of the Mongol war machine. It is a psychological trick that requires absolute discipline. You engage the enemy, you pretend to break in a panic, and you run. You let the enemy chase you, let them string out their formations, let them get drunk on the illusion of victory. And then when they are exhausted and disorganized, you turn your horses around and butcher them. This is exactly what Subutai just did to the European coalition at the Kalka River. He is the undisputed grandmaster of this lethal illusion. So imagine the colossal audacity required to try and pull this exact same trick on him. The Volga-Bulgar commanders know they cannot beat the Mongol Empire in a straightforward clash of cavalry. But they also know that Subutai does not believe a fair fight exists anymore. He has spent the last year proving that he is a god of war. So the Bulgars decide to use his own god complex against him. They send a pitifully small vanguard of light skirmishers to the southern edge of the forest. They do not look like a disciplined military force. They look like a panicked local militia that stumbled into the wrong valley. They ride out of the tree line, loose a few uncoordinated arrows at the approaching Mongol column, and then immediately whip their horses and flee in apparent blinding terror back into the shadows of the Samara Bend. If Subutai had a clear head, his predatory instincts would have screamed at him to stop. The signs are glaringly obvious. The attack is too weak, the retreat is too fast. The terrain ahead is a claustrophobic nightmare, practically screaming the word ambush. A younger, more cautious Subutai would have halted his massive army, sent out dozens of scouting parties, and systematically secured the perimeter. But the man commanding this army is no longer cautious. He is intoxicated by the blood of the Rus princes and the weight of stolen silver. When he sees the Bulgar skirmishers running, he does not see a tactical maneuver. He sees reality conforming to his divine expectations. Of course, they are running. Everyone runs from the vanguard of Genghis Khan. The order is given to pursue. This is the exact moment the virus of arrogance finally destroys the Mongol immune system. The legendary discipline that conquered half the known world instantly evaporates. The Mongol vanguard, desperate for more loot, slaves, and easy kills, completely breaks from their tightly controlled formations. They spur their heavy war horses forward, screaming guttural battle cries, rushing headlong into the narrow, muddy trails of the dense forest. They are no longer a cohesive military unit. They are a mob of arrogant killers chasing a mirage. Ahead of them, the Bulgar riders are not panicking at all. They are executing a highly technical, perfectly timed withdrawal. They are keeping their horses at a measured gallop, staying just close enough to keep the Mongols rabid with bloodlust, but just far enough ahead to avoid the lethal, armor-piercing range of the Mongol composite bows. They are the pipers leading the rats straight into the river. As the Mongols push deeper and deeper into the Samara Bend, the physical world begins to subtly change. The sunlight begins to vanish, choked out by the thick canopy of ancient pines and heavy birch branches. The wide dirt trails begin to pinch, forcing the massive Mongol column to squeeze tightly together. The ground beneath the hooves of their horses turns from hard-packed dirt to soft, treacherous boot-sucking mud. The Mongols are screaming too loudly to notice that the forest around them has gone completely, unnaturally silent. They are riding too fast to realize that the tracks they are following are funneling them directly into a deep valley with steep, impassable walls on either side. They are experiencing the supreme ecstasy of the apex predator, right before it closes its jaws on a fleeing deer. But they are completely blind to the truth. They are not the predator. They are the sheep. They have just walked willingly, joyfully, into a highly engineered, industrial slaughterhouse. The reversed feigned retreat has worked perfectly. The jaws of the trap are now firmly closed around the neck of the greatest, most terrifying army on earth. All the Bulgars have to do now is pull the lever and watch the blood flow. The physical sensation of a trap closing is rarely a sudden snap. It is usually a slow, suffocating squeeze. For the 20,000 Mongol cavalrymen pouring into the Samara Bend, the squeeze begins at the hooves of their horses. These are steppe ponies, bred for the hard, unforgiving plains of Asia. They are used to solid earth that rings like iron under their gallop, but now they are plunging into the dark, rotting heart of a primeval European forest. The ground beneath them turns into a soup of decomposing leaves and thick, black mud. With every stride, the horses have to fight against the suction of the earth, burning precious energy just to keep moving forward. Look up, and the sky is gone. The endless blue horizon of the steppe, the domain of their sky god Tengri, has been replaced by a suffocating canopy of ancient pine and oak. The sunlight barely penetrates the thick branches, casting long, disorienting shadows across the narrow trails. The Mongol column, usually a wide, sweeping crescent of destruction, is forced by the terrain to stretch out into a single, vulnerable line miles long. The men at the rear cannot see the men at the front. The legendary communication system of the Mongol army, reliant on visual signals and rapid couriers, completely breaks down in the claustrophobic darkness of the timber. If you want to kill a great white shark, you do not fight it in the open ocean. You drag it onto the beach where its speed and power mean absolutely nothing. The Volga Bulgars have just dragged the greatest cavalry force on earth onto a geographical beach. The Mongols are blind, deaf, and wading through a swamp, but the bloodlust is still driving them forward. They can still see the rearguard of the Bulgar skirmishers just ahead, always staying out of bowshot, leading them deeper into the labyrinth. Subutai's vanguards are whipping their exhausted mounts, screaming curses into the trees, fixated on the prey in front of them. They do not realize that the ravine they are riding through is getting narrower with every passing mile. They do not notice that the steep, wooded ridges on either side of them are crawling with thousands of heavily armed men looking down at them like fish in a barrel. This is the genius of the Volga-Bulgar engineering. They have not built a traditional fortress to stop the Mongols. A stone wall can be breached, a wall can be flanked. Instead, they have weaponized the earth itself to strip away the Mongols' only real advantage: speed. Without speed, a light cavalry archer is just a man wearing leather armor sitting on a tired horse. And right now, the Mongol army is barely moving at a walking pace. The mud is up to the horses' knees. The heavy wagons of stolen European loot, the silver, the silks, the slaves, are bogging down, creating massive bottlenecks that ripple through the column, forcing thousands of men to halt in the freezing shadows. Then, the impossible happens. The Bulgar skirmishers ahead of the Mongol vanguard reach a dense thicket of felled trees, a massive barricade deliberately constructed across the valley floor. But instead of turning to fight, the Bulgars simply slip through prearranged gaps in the timber and vanish into the forest. The bait has completed its purpose. The Mongols haul back on their reins, their horses gasping for air in the sudden silence. The vanguard commander stares at the barricade of twisted wood, the realization finally piercing through his arrogance. They are at a dead end. There is no room to turn 20,000 horses around. There is no open ground to deploy their archers. They are packed shoulder to shoulder in a muddy trench surrounded by steep ridges and impenetrable forest. The hunters are suddenly terrifyingly stationary, and that is when the silence of the Samara Bend is shattered. It does not start with a battle cry. It starts with the mechanical, horrifying sound of thousands of wooden bows being drawn back simultaneously from the ridges above. The sky god Tengri is not looking down at the Mongols today. The only things looking down at them are the Volga Bulgars, and they have brought enough arrows to block out the sun. When the first volley of arrows blackens the narrow sliver of sky above the ravine, the Mongol war machine experiences a sensation it has not felt in generations: helplessness. For decades, these men have been the undisputed masters of ranged warfare. They are the ones who dictate the distance, raining death from afar while dancing out of reach of heavier, slower armies. But now, the geometry of the battlefield has been violently inverted. They are packed shoulder to shoulder at the bottom of a muddy trench, looking up at steep, timber-covered ridges crawling with thousands of Volga Bulgar archers. The Mongols try to raise their legendary composite bows to return fire, but they are squeezed so tightly together they can barely draw their bowstrings. And even if they had the room, firing upward through a dense, tangled canopy of ancient pine branches is a mathematical impossibility. The Bulgar archers do not even have to aim. The valley floor is so saturated with trapped Mongol cavalry that simply firing blindly into the mass guarantees a strike. The air fills with the sickening wet thud of iron-piercing leather, horseflesh, and bone. The light silk shirts the Mongols wear beneath their armor, designed to catch spinning arrowheads and pull them cleanly out of flesh on the open steppe, are utterly useless against the sheer kinetic force of heavy shafts plunging straight down from the high ground. Within seconds, the vanguard of the greatest army on earth is reduced to a writhing, screaming carpet of human agony. But the true horror of the Samara Bend is not what happens to the men. It is what happens to the horses. The tough, resilient steppe ponies are the biological engines of the Mongol Empire. They are fearless on the open plains, but they are not machines. When an arrow takes a horse in the neck, it panics. It rears up, thrashing wildly in the confined space, its iron-shod hooves slamming into the faces and chests of the riders packed tightly around it. A chain reaction of blind terror rips through the column. Thousands of trapped, bleeding animals begin to crush each other to death, dragging their riders down into the freezing black mud. Men who survived the grueling campaigns of China and the brutal slaughter of the Kalka River are suffocated beneath the weight of their own dying mounts. Then the rain of arrows suddenly stops. The resulting silence is not a reprieve. It is the transition from execution to butchery. Through the dense trees, the heavy infantry of the Volga Bulgars begins to descend the ridges. They are not rushing wildly into the fray. They are moving with the cold, deliberate pace of exterminators. They form a solid wall of overlapping shields, bristling with long, steel-tipped spears. This is the exact type of static, heavy formation the Mongols usually mock, kite, and destroy with sweeping, flanking maneuvers. But in this claustrophobic nightmare, there are no flanks, there is no open ground, there is nowhere to run. The Bulgars simply push their heavy shield wall into the disorganized mass of terrified horses and desperate men. The Mongols draw their curved swords and heavy maces, but they have absolutely zero leverage. You cannot swing a sword when your elbows are pinned to your ribs by the bodies of your dying comrades. The Bulgar spearmen methodically thrust their weapons forward, skewering the trapped conquerors like fish in a barrel, stepping over the fresh corpses to push deeper into the meat grinder. For the first time in their lives, the invincible butchers of the East are experiencing the cold, suffocating terror they have inflicted on millions. The men who, just weeks ago, laughed and drank wine while listening to the bones of Russian princes snap beneath their floorboards are now drowning in blood and mud, screaming for mercy in a forest that does not care. The absolute chaos strips away their legendary discipline, reducing these godlike warriors to a frantic, clawing mob desperate to escape. Somewhere in that churning sea of slaughter, Subutai realizes that his grand victory tour has just become a desperate, humiliating fight for his own survival. The silence that follows a massacre is always heavier than the noise of the battle itself. Deep inside the Samara Bend, the screams of dying horses and the mechanical thud of Bulgar spears have finally stopped. The invincible Mongol vanguard, the same men who had partied on top of suffocating Russian princes just weeks earlier, has been completely dismantled. But not all of them are dead. From the bloody, freezing mud of the ravines, the Volga Bulgar infantry drags out the survivors. They strip them of their armor, bind their wrists with coarse rope, and force them to their knees. Roughly 4,000 Mongol warriors are taken alive. And it is here, in the cold light of the aftermath, that the true genius of the Bulgar strategy reveals itself. If you are a Mongol cavalryman kneeling in the dirt, you know exactly what comes next. You know the rules of the steppe. The strong consume the weak. You expect to be tortured, dismembered, or executed in some highly creative, agonizing way. You are ready for the axe to fall. In a twisted way, a brutal execution is the only thing that can preserve your dignity. Dying violently at the hands of a worthy enemy validates your identity as a warrior. It means you are dangerous enough to be killed. But the leaders of the Volga Bulgars are not just military tacticians. They are the supreme merchants of the northern trade routes. They understand economics and, more importantly, they understand the devastating power of psychological warfare. They look at these 4,000 shivering, muddy captives. They see the terror in the eyes of the men who claim to be the wrath of God. And the Bulgars make a brilliant, cruel calculation. You do not destroy a myth by killing it. You destroy a myth by turning it into a punchline. The Bulgar commanders send out a message to the shattered remnants of the Mongol army, and they set a ransom for the prisoners. But they do not ask for the massive wagons of silver and gold looted from Eastern Europe. They do not ask for fine silk or high-quality steel weapons. They ask for sheep. Specifically, they demand 1 ram for every single Mongol soldier they hold captive. To fully grasp the apocalyptic magnitude of this insult, you have to understand the Mongol psychology. In their culture, the wolf is the ultimate symbol of predatory dominance. They view themselves as the wolves of the world, a divine force meant to cull the weak and rule the plains. The rest of humanity is nothing but a massive, pathetic flock of sheep waiting to be harvested. With one simple ransom demand, the Volga Bulgars completely invert this reality. They look the apex predators in the eye and tell them they are nothing but livestock. They assign a concrete, undeniable market value to the legendary warriors of Genghis Khan, and that value is exactly equal to a stupid, grass-eating, bleating farm animal. Picture the absolute humiliation of the exchange. This is not a formal military negotiation conducted with honor and respect. It is a barnyard transaction. 4,000 elite killers, men whose mere shadows once made kings tremble, are marched out of the forest in their filthy rags. Coming toward them from the opposite direction is a massive, chaotic herd of 4,000 rams. The Bulgar guards do not look at the Mongols with fear or hatred. They look at them with pity and amusement, the way a farmer looks at a muddy pig. The soundtrack to this historic moment is not the beating of war drums or the clash of steel. It is the deafening, pathetic bleating of thousands of sheep. The smell of dried blood and sweat is completely overwhelmed by the stench of wet wool and animal manure. The Mongol prisoners are handed over to their commanders, but their souls have been utterly annihilated. They have been permanently branded by shame. The Volga Bulgars did not just defeat the Mongol vanguard in the mud of the Samara Bend. They castrated their entire mythology, sending them back to the steppe, not as gods of war, but as a flock of humiliated sheep. Look at the horizon of the Mongolian steppe. It is late 1224. You are a scout on the edge of the empire, waiting for the victorious return of Subutai and Jebe. You expect to see endless wagons groaning under the weight of Russian silver, strings of thousands of slaves, and the triumphant banners of the greatest cavalry force on earth. Instead, what crawls out of the western haze is a ghost ship of an army. There is no singing. There are no war drums. There is only the shuffling of exhausted, half-starved ponies and the hollow 1,000-yard stares of men who have looked total humiliation in the eye. Only a fraction of the 20,000 warriors who rode into the Samara Bend are coming home. And trailing behind them, a constant, bleating reminder of their absolute castration, are the sheep. Subutai, the architect of 100 slaughters, rides in silence. His armor is battered, his legendary aura of invincibility shattered. When he finally reaches the royal encampment at Karakoram, he has to do the hardest thing a Mongol commander can do. He has to kneel before Genghis Khan, the man who conquered half the world, and explain how the apex predators of the eternal blue sky were outsmarted, butchered, and traded for barnyard animals by a bunch of river merchants in the forest. You might expect a brutal execution. You might expect Genghis Khan to order Subutai boiled alive for this unprecedented disgrace. But Genghis is not a reactive tyrant. He is a cold, calculating machine of empire. He listens to the casualty reports. He hears the agonizing details of the reversed, feigned retreat, and he understands instantly that the loss of a few thousand men is irrelevant. The real disaster of the Samara Bend is a catastrophic loss of geopolitical leverage. The Mongol Empire does not rule through sheer numbers. They rule through the psychological paralysis of their enemies. Their primary weapon is the absolute, unquestionable myth of their own invincibility. If the kings of Europe, the sultans of the Middle East, and the emperors of China find out that the great Mongol war machine can be funneled into a muddy ditch and slaughtered, the fear evaporates, and without fear, the empire will drown in 1,000 localized rebellions. The Volga Bulgars know this. They deliberately kept the prisoners alive to trade for rams, precisely to humiliate the Mongols on the global stage. The merchants traveling down the Volga River are already carrying the hilarious damning story to the sprawling cities of the Islamic world. So, Genghis Khan initiates one of the most effective state-sponsored media cover-ups in medieval history. The survivors are sworn to absolute secrecy. The official chronicles, the sacred text known as the Secret History of the Mongols, dedicates exhaustive poetic chapters to minor cattle raids and obscure tribal skirmishes. But when it comes to the campaign of 1223, the narrative suddenly becomes incredibly vague. The total annihilation of the Rus at the Kalka River is celebrated in glorious detail. The disastrous detour into the Volga Bulgaria is reduced to a confusing footnote, a deliberate blurring of the timeline, or completely erased entirely. The Mongols realize that the pen is just as important as the sword when it comes to maintaining an empire. If you cannot win the battle, you simply delete the battlefield from the map of human memory. But erasing the event from parchment does not erase it from Subutai's mind. As he sits by the fire in the high steppe, listening to the winter wind howl across the grass, the humiliation metastasizes into something far more dangerous than his previous arrogance. His ego has been burned away by the acid of defeat, leaving nothing but a dark, terrifying, obsessive pragmatism. He replays the claustrophobia of the ravines, the mud sucking at the hooves of his horses, the mechanical thud of the Bulgar spears. He realizes his mistake. He had treated the environment as an afterthought. He had underestimated the engineering of static civilizations. The Volga Bulgars think they have taught the Mongols a lesson about boundaries. They think they have built a wall of corpses that will keep the wolves out forever. They are tragically wrong. They haven't stopped Subutai. They have only educated him. 13 years is a long time to tell a joke. By the year 1236, the story of the ram barter has become a legendary tavern tale along the Volga River. The Bulgar merchants tell it to everyone who will listen. They laugh about the day they made the great Mongol conquerors bleat like sheep in the mud of the Samara Bend. They look at their dense forests and their fortified cities, and they feel incredibly safe. They believe they have successfully vaccinated their homeland against the Mongol plague, but they do not understand how a virus mutates. They do not understand that by humiliating Subutai, they didn't cure the disease. They just made it infinitely more lethal. For 13 years, Subutai has not laughed. He has been busy conquering northern China, crushing rebellions, and studying the brutal mathematics of siege warfare. He has taken the humiliation of the Samara Bend and forged it into a terrifying new military doctrine. He realizes that you cannot defeat a fortress of wood and mud with light cavalry. So he doesn't bring light cavalry. When he finally returns to the borders of Volga, Bulgaria, in the autumn of 1236, he is not leading a mere vanguard of 20,000 horse archers. He is commanding the wrath of the entire Mongol Empire. Picture the horizon turning black. This time, there is no arrogant, headlong rush into the forest. There are no feigned retreats. Subutai has brought 130,000 men. He has brought heavy cavalry clad in steel. He has brought tens of thousands of conscripted infantry to chop down the forests that once trapped him. Most terrifyingly, he has brought Chinese siege engineers pushing massive mechanical monstrosities, catapults, ballistas, and early gunpowder bombs. He hasn't come to fight a war of maneuver. He has come to execute a systematic industrial demolition of an entire civilization. The Volga Bulgars try to spring their traps again. They retreat into the dense timber, hoping to funnel the Mongols into the narrow ravines. But Subutai refuses to play their game. He doesn't chase them. Instead, he orders his engineers to systematically clear-cut the ancient forests. The Mongols physically alter the geography, chopping down the trees and using the timber to build massive siege lines. They fill the treacherous swamps with earth and the bodies of their slaves, creating hard, flat roads for their heavy war machines. They literally turn the claustrophobic nightmare of the Samara Bend into a flat, open slaughterhouse. When the Mongol war machine finally reaches the great Bulgar capital of Bilar, it is not a siege, it is an execution. The city is a marvel of medieval architecture, a wealthy hub of international trade surrounded by massive oak walls. But oak cannot withstand the concentrated bombardment of Chinese artillery. Subutai unleashes a continuous deafening barrage of massive stones, incendiary pitch, and explosive rockets. The walls shatter, the city burns, and then the Mongols pour in. This time, there are no prisoners taken for ransom. There are no negotiations. Subutai issues an order of absolute, total extermination. The wealthy merchants who laughed about the sheep are dragged into the streets and slaughtered. The engineers who built the barricades in 1223 are systematically hunted down and put to the sword. The city of Bilar is burned so thoroughly that its ruins will not be discovered for centuries. The Mongols erased the Volga Bulgars from the map of the world with such extreme prejudice that the very name of their civilization becomes a ghost. Subutai stands in the ashes of the Bulgar capital, the scent of burning wood and roasting flesh finally washing away the stench of wet wool that has haunted him for over a decade. He has proven the ultimate terrifying rule of the Mongol Empire.
You can beat them once, you can outsmart them, humiliate them, and send them running back to the steppe, but they will always come back. And when they do, they will bring hell with them. The joke is finally over, and the punchline is a mountain of skulls.
When the last drop of blood sank into the freezing mud of the Samara Bend, it left behind a profound, terrifying truth that most history books try to ignore. When you look back at this forgotten slaughter, you don't just see a brilliant tactical ambush or a quirky footnote in the sprawling, bloody ledger of the Mongol Empire. You are looking at a brutal, timeless autopsy of human arrogance. The story of the ram barter isn't just a piece of medieval dark comedy. It is a mirror held up to the face of every empire, every superpower, and every invincible institution that starts believing its own propaganda. Subutai was, without question, the greatest military mind of his century. He was a human calculator who engineered the deaths of millions, but at the Kalka River he drank the toxic poison of his own myth. He stopped calculating and started expecting. He began to believe that his reputation alone would flatten ancient forests and dry up treacherous swamps. The Volga Bulgars didn't defeat the Mongols with superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They defeated them by simply stepping aside and letting the crushing weight of Subutai's massive ego do all the heavy lifting. They used the absolute religious certainty of the Mongols against them, proving a universal law of survival. The exact moment you believe you are untouchable is the exact moment you have exposed your throat to the knife. But history is rarely a fairy tale where the clever underdog wins and lives happily ever after. There is a second, much darker lesson hidden in the charred, forgotten ruins of the Bulgar capital, and it is a terrifying lesson about the mechanics of humiliation. The Volga Bulgars played a brilliant psychological game in 1223. They thought that by turning the wolves of the steppe into bleating sheep, they would permanently break the spirit of the empire. They made the fatal, existential mistake of confusing a humiliated monster with a dead one. Humiliating a global superpower does not make it peaceful. It just strips away its careless confidence and replaces it with a cold, psychotic need for absolute erasure. The Bulgars thought they had written the final chapter of the Mongol threat, laughing at their own cleverness for a decade. They didn't realize they had just signed their own civilization's death warrant, merely delaying their apocalypse by 13 years. When Subutai finally returned, he didn't bring his ego. He left his arrogance on the steppe and brought only the cold, mechanical mathematics of genocide. He proved that revenge is not a passionate fire, it is a slow, patient, industrial machine. The disaster at Samara Bend whispers a chilling warning to us across the centuries. It tells us that no one is truly invincible. Every giant has a blind spot. Every unstoppable war machine can be bogged down in the mud, and every god of war can be made to bleed and beg. But it also warns us that if you are going to strike the king, you had better make sure you kill him. If you only embarrass him, you are just digging a grave for your children. The line between a brilliant historic victory and a delayed national suicide is sometimes nothing more than 13 years of quiet, simmering hatred. If you made it to the end of this dark chapter, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel was built for. We don't just look at the dates, the maps, and the shiny armor. We look at the psychological meat grinder of our past. If you found value in this deep dive, please hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed with the bell notification turned on. It is the only way to ensure you don't miss our next descent into the shadows of history. And before you go, I want to hear your brutal honesty in the comments below. Who do you think made the ultimate fatal mistake? Subutai for marching blindly into a geographical nightmare, or the Volga Bulgars for letting the greatest general in the world live to see another day? Let the debate begin down below. Thank you for watching, and remember, history isn't just about the dead, it's a warning for the living.